good evening. From our headquarters in Kyiv, this is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only primetime TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English. I'm Josh Kavensky, a reporter at the Kyiv Post. Tonight, we will examine Ukraine's new government and whether it can deliver on hopes for reform, talk about the country's fight against corruption with a European prosecutor leading the effort, chat about art with Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, and take you to Crimea, where repression against the indigenous Crimean Tatars continues. You can also now download our podcast on Mixcloud. If you prefer to just listen to it, that is an option. We have a website that you can go to find separate content and full videos. That's int.hromadske.tv. And finally, we encourage you to download our application. You can go to itunes.com, to the iTunes store. You can search Hromadske International and find the app, download it. There will be news updates, clips from our broadcasts, everything you need to stay in touch with us. And I'll join you back after a short break. So Ukraine got a new government on Thursday after the Rada voted to appoint former parliament speaker Volodymyr Groysman as to the position of prime minister. That move replaced Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who tendered his resignation exactly 1 week ago, ostensibly ending a political crisis that began in early February with the bombshell resignation and unexpected resignation, I should add, of economy minister Ivaris Abramovichus. Groysman, a former mayor of Vinnytsia, who is widely seen as President Poroshenko's man in the cabinet of ministers, has already come under pretty heavy criticism from both civil society and the West for assembling a new government, a new cabinet of ministers that observers say are unlikely to continue the country's post-Maidan reforms. None of the new ministers are foreigners. They're all Ukrainian, which some say opens them up to conflicts of interest. And there you can see Poroshenko and Groysman in his native Vinnytsia. And the three main reform-minded ministers are all out of the picture. So, for example, the new finance minister is a man named Alexander Danilyuk. He's replacing the U.S.-born Natalie Oresko. He's a former McKinsey consultant, but he was also, very controversially, an advisor to ousted President Viktor Yanukovych. He's been played up by the government as having played a close role in the IMF talks. In any case, he will now lead the Ukraine side's negotiations with Western creditors over the future of the IMF's loan program. The new energy minister is another interesting character. He's a man named Ihor Nasalik, former Bloc Petro Poroshenko MP, selected straight from the Rada. Many observers say that the Ministry of Energy in particular is a focal point for corruption, given that large amounts of the country's wealth is allegedly siphoned off through schemes in the oil and gas industries. So because of that, few expect Nasalik to really fight oligarchic control in the country. Even some anti-corruption activists like Samopomych MP Victoria Wojcicka have directly clashed with him in the past over attempted anti-corruption moves in the gas industry. Stepan Kubiv, a banker, he is replacing Ivaris Abramovichus as economy minister. He's a former MP with both Bloc Petro Poroshenko, and earlier he was with Batkivshina, Yulia Tymoshenko's party. Kubiv, kind of controversially as well, headed the National Bank after Maidan until Valeria Hontaryova took the position. He's, for some people, a disappointing pick because there is some controversy over his tenure while at the National Bank. Some have accused him of conducting improper refinancing of banks and then profiting off of the collapse of banks that didn't do so well because of the refinancing. So that's not great. Finally, Volodymyr Amelyan, the new Minister of Infrastructure, replacing the Andriy Pivovarsky. He was assistant minister to Pivovarsky. They enjoyed very close ties, so people are seeing him in a somewhat more positive light. But in the end, the West is not entirely happy about this. We can see from a tweet from Nomura analyst Timothy Ash, that we can get up on screen shortly, comparing the new government to a Yanukovych-style administration, even more than that, actually, which is extremely strong. It's a very strong statement to make. That being said, it would be unfair to not mention that Groysman did make at least one pro-reform step in this process, he hired former Bloc Petro Poroshenko member of parliament, Ivana Klimpush-Tsinsadze, as the now Vice Minister of European Integration, which is a post that's long gone unfulfilled. But you don't need to just listen to me talk about this stuff. We can talk with Chatham House Ukraine Forum Manager Arisia Lutsevich, with whom Hromadske sat down on Saturday morning and talked with her about Ukraine's government and what both Ukraine's government and the West can do to spur reform in this country.
Expectations for Ukraine to deliver are very high, both at home and in the West. And it's normal because Ukraine has such a great potential. We all talk about Ukraine having great potential not being realized. And the world and Ukraine wants to see this breakthrough. But there are many complications that kind of build out like layers after the collapse of the Soviet Union that compared to Eastern Europe that is now part of the European Union, or the Baltic states that are part of the European Union, make it different. And why? We are talking about it in the report. One complication is, of course, the incomplete reform that throughout all these 25 years, the system was kind of mutating. It was first it was the post-Soviet system, but now it's something different because you have the vested interest around, you had a certain kind of capitalism that built on top of it, you have a certain kind of pluralist democracy with its flaws, you have a certain constitution. So all of this now we have to untangle in a way that it's not the way it was, it's a fresh collapse of the Soviet Union when we could build a new system. Another thing is that why we are different from, Ukraine is different from Eastern Europe, for example, Poland, is that indeed the kind of privatization Ukraine had created these business groups that capture the state, and we are talking about it in the report, that how a few people really control a lot of Ukrainian GDP with monopolies and also control over political system where they transfer their business capital and political capital and prevent some of the transformative change that Ukraine needs to go through.
People always go saying, well, this is the right political force and this is the left political force, when in fact there is no such thing and parties do not matter in Ukraine.
Well, parties are also special creatures in Ukraine where they are hardly ideological, they are more built around personalities, they are financed like, basket cases of different oligarchs also. They don't have a real membership where you can explain what kind of principles these people standing by. And actually, if you ask me what is the cause of the current political crisis, why Yatsenyuk's government collapsed, partly is because immature political game of key leaders representing parties in the coalition. Either it's political, opportunism where they want to get early elections because they see their ratings growing, or it's lack of taking political responsibility for reforms in the country, where we do see the pattern in the coalition, the previous coalition, that wasn't voting as the coalition, it was completely ad hoc around unexplainable interests for people. So yes, indeed, we need to focus, and this is actually interesting for the West. I know Americans are doing a lot with political parties, but more has to be done around building membership base, ideological base, making the difference between the liberal, the left, who is protecting workers' interests, who is protecting, the middle class and entrepreneurial class, and what are these propositions that parties are putting on the table for a certain group of Ukrainians.
How do you feel we can change or fix this issue and connect, crucially important for this country, civil society groups with actual public, and make the public support those groups rather than international organizations?
Now that's a big question I'm pondering myself, and a lot of people in Ukraine also asking themselves. I think there are two triggers that could make some change. On one hand, it has to be some of the civil society leaders that will be concerned about results, because we have to, a lot of Ukrainian civil society work is focused on process. Of course, it's important, but advocacy very much will be much more effective if it's built around campaigning, around engaging people. So some will be able to change, some won't. They will never reform, so to say. On the other hand, it has to be donors, those who are, in a way, supporting these groups. They have to ask different questions, they have to look for more long-term support, and they have to demand, basically, in a way, make conditionality, like they're making conditionality for the state, conditionality for NGOs to say, how many town hall meetings will you have, how many local funds you will collect, who is your membership, what is your advisory board, who is your executive board, what is your constituency, what is your legitimacy. And this is where we should focus in Ukraine, policies and institutions. On one hand, the West and Ukrainians should ensure that either new institutions that are created, such as anti-corruption bureau, anti-corruption prosecution, do they deliver? We have to ask these kinds of questions. We have to ask the questions, if there will be a new prosecutor general, whoever it will be, are they separating, political function, oversight for the investigative process, and just rule of law function? This is the key question, and it's the function of the institutions, it's the quality of delivery of results of these institutions, and this will be much easier for us then to separate, so to say, noise and the political infighting, which will be, because it's a very volatile time in Ukraine. It's not going to change anytime soon, and because of the political culture we discussed before. But for people who want to see Ukraine moving forward, we have to see the perspective that gives. And this perspective means institutions, values, principles. And these new people that now came to government, none of them have been ministers before, right? There has not been a single guy or woman we can judge by saying this, how this person served in the ministry. So let's give them, a leap of faith. It will not be easy because they are not a lot of people ask how legitimate are they in terms of, quality of people, and also the West. Will you deliver on reforms? They're asking tough questions. But let's measure them on the indicators that are performance and results, not, personality. Of course, I think also why Ukrainians and the Western are so sensitive is because of this high corruption in Ukraine. And even if you could be a good manager, for example, if you have any kind of, past history and your integrity is in doubt, then you're in a big trouble in Ukrainian office.
Thank you so much.
So that was Oresya Lutsevich, manager of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. You can watch the full video either on Hromadski's website or at the Chatham House website as well. Now it's been 6 months since Ukraine was scheduled to receive a loan of $1.7 billion from the IMF in October. The loan went into jeopardy with the start of the political crisis, which has been going on in some form since the winter. While many in Kyiv hope that Hrosman's appointment will quell foreign creditors' fears of instability, there's been a certain, you could say, ambivalence or duality in the West's response to all of this. On one side, they're applauding Hrosman and saying that, thank God it's stable. We're going to support Ukraine against Russia. On the other side, they're saying, without any more reform, we can't continue to support it. So there's a bit of a contradiction there. Well, let's look at a statement from British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond. He says it's vitally important that Ukraine's new government builds on the progress made by its predecessor and continues to implement reforms and root out corruption. In the same statement, he also accentuates his government's support for Ukraine against Russia. Another statement from Joe Biden. He called Hrosman, the guy over there in the plasma looking at Ukraine, saying that the vice president in the call stressed that in order to maintain international support for Ukraine, the new team should move forward quickly on Ukraine's reform program. At the same time, Biden also told Hrosman that he also reiterated the unwavering U.S. commitment to the prosperity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. So it's sort of two messages at once. And finally, the German Foreign Ministry kind of continued on the trend, saying that there is now a chance to put an end to the period of political uncertainty in Kyiv, that the reform process now urgently needs to be continued, but at the same time, they also said that Germany will continue to do all it can to support Ukraine in its efforts regardless. So these are important distinctions. But we fortunately managed to sit down with Johannes Regenbrecht, head of the Ukraine task force at the German Foreign Ministry, to get the inside perspective on the Western response to the change in Ukraine's government and the plans for reform in Ukraine.
Judiciary is, of course, extremely important. This is the next step to take. First steps have been taken so far. I think if we take stock of what has been done so far, it is some achievements have been reached indeed. Now the next step is the judiciary, the reform of the judiciary. So it is the reading, the last reading of the constitutional reform when it comes to the judiciary. It is the independence of judges, the reform of the whole judicial system, and first of all, of course, the reform of the prosecution. And there we really expect progress not only on the paper, but we want progress from within the prosecution, because we must see to it and we must avoid that any progress and reform within the judiciary is being blocked and prevented from people from within the prosecution. So we need a professional, independent, reformed prosecution that is seriously working and independent from the influence of the politicians. The prosecution is there to prosecute an attack against the law and not to defend particular interests of individual persons. And this is extremely important, and we will have a very, very close look to it that this happens. And linked to that, cross-cutting and overwhelming issue is the fight against corruption. Created an anti-corruption bureau in last fall. It has now created the necessary basis and made some appointments on a corruption prevention office. First cases are being followed upon. So, but this can be only the start. And unfortunately, we feel the lack of support from the side of the prosecution to these agencies. They can only work effectively if and when they are being supported by the judiciary and by the prosecution in first place. So this has to come together, and these are our very clear expectations. So these are only two elements, but I think this is what the citizens from Ukraine expect, this is what the public expects, this is what the international partners and friends of Ukraine expect. We have two main points on the agenda. One point or one track is the security track, and the other is the political track. Both tracks are closely intertwined and interlinked, as you know. On the security track, unfortunately, we see the ceasefire becoming more and more fragile. I mean, every person, be it a civilian person or a soldier, hurt, injured, or killed is one person too much. And unfortunately, we see people killed along the line of contact in the past days and over the past weeks. We see more and more weapons being drawn to the line of contact. We see more and more kinetic and military activities along the line of contact. This must stop. I understand that the political track is not very popular, to put it mildly, in Ukraine, but it is a necessary step to take. Why is it so necessary? Ukraine is well advised to be, as former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk put it, to be whiter than white and to deliver on the Minsk agreements. And certainly when it comes to an issue such as local elections in these regions, certainly everybody knows that under the current circumstances, it would not be realistic to tackle such a process, because simply the security provisions are not there to have free and fair elections on the basis of OSCE standards, on the basis of the law of Ukraine and with international observation. So these are the conditions that are clearly spelled out in the Minsk package of measures. And all these conditions must be met in order to conduct such election. Sometimes we tend to forget, about Crimea, and it's very close to the heart of Angela Merkel, who says we must continue to shed light on the situation in Crimea and to recall this is Ukraine, this is not Russia. So I think this is also very important. So obligations are there on the table, and we will measure Russia's behavior on the or against the delivery on the implementation of each and every 13 articles of the Minsk package of measures. There's no other game in town, Minsk and its implementation, including by Moscow, of course.
That was Johannes Regenbrecht, head of the Ukraine Task Force at the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Full uncut versions of both interviews, both with Johannes and with Arisia, are going to be available on the Hromadske website, both on our YouTube channel and on the website itself. We will rejoin you in 1 second. The fight against corruption. Many observers say that Ukraine's fight against graft is the battle most crucial to the country's survival. I sat down with Giovanni Kessler, director of the European Anti-Fraud Office, to talk about what can be done to reform the fight against corruption to help move forward, and how we can build and how Ukraine can build institutions to achieve that end.
So, Giovanni, my first question is general. What's the biggest challenge facing the fight against corruption in Ukraine?
The biggest challenge is, two biggest challenges. One is a cultural one. One has to change habits in the institutions, in the people working for the institutions, but also the citizens of Ukraine, understanding that corruption is not acceptable at any level, understanding that corruption affects and prevents any economic growth and economic development of the country, and even more worrying, corruption prevents any form of democracy actually in a country. A country where corruption is rampant, where corruption is in the control, is not a democratic country, is not a country where there are people accountable for the decision they take, and the powers and the decisions are taken in the dark. Those who have more money are those who take the decisions, not those who are meant or elected to take decisions.
And it seems, though, that the decisions of even who will prosecute corruption in Ukraine are often made in the dark, as you say. For example, we recently saw Viktor Shokin ousted last week.
Yeah, that's the second main challenge if one wants to really fight and abolish corruption. There is the cultural one, but there is also the challenge to have institutions in place, credible institutions, efficient institutions in place, which are able to fight corruption, actually, which are acting under the rule of law. And this is a big challenge for Ukraine as well, because so far institutions in place, I'm referring to the judiciary actually, both in the prosecution and in the judges part, let's say belong to the past, to a past where a rule of law was not the priority actually, where the judiciary and in particular the prosecution office had a political role actually, and was a mean for, or a tool for political political interests, actually.
And with Naboo specifically, I mean, there's been some criticism that its powers are limited, that maybe it's not a powerful enough organization to really attack corruption as it exists here. What do you think?
Well, one can discuss at length about it, but actually I think that they already can do something very important. Where one has to still to work quite consistently, as I see, is on the judicial side, because any work done by investigative bodies has to then be followed up and judged upon by prosecution and by judges. So a serious reform of judiciary, it's also necessary. And of the role of judiciary, it's also a cultural reform.
So now we move from corruption to the arts. We're going to have an interview with Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, who was in Kyiv a couple of weeks ago promoting her new project. Since the breakdown in relations between Russia and Ukraine, Kyiv has become a magnet for many Russian artists looking for more freedom of expression, you might say. And Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, even though she lives in Williamsburg and Brooklyn, New York, I think, she was here in Kyiv for work on her new project. And in this interview with our very own Maxime Arastavi, she talked about LGBT rights. She talked about Putin's manipulation of hatred towards the LGBT community. And she talked about the political scene in Russia in general. Take a look.
Your art is very political, right? So it has a lot of messaging, that it's not only about just art as per se, but also a lot of messaging. When it comes to feminism, when it comes to queer culture, when it comes to political freedoms in Russia. But I was just wondering if you do an art that it also bears with itself political message, do you kind of concerned that the majority of Russian public does not resonate with your art, because again, you're more popular abroad than inside Russia?
I think it's kind of natural, because it was the reason why I decided to do my art. And when you start to do political art, you want it because you have desire to change something, and obviously you're not satisfied with the current situation. So I'm not the type of artist who just want to be praised and blah blah blah, because when you're a political artist you have to be ready that people will not like you just because they don't understand what the fuck is going on, like why. And we break not just political rules, but quite often aesthetical rules. Mm-hmm. And we break their understandings of people what normality is. We're not just political in close sense, like we are political in sense of Michel Foucault. So we try to work with the sense, what is norm, where is the borders. So obviously people don't like to be shocked. So obviously they don't like us, but I'm not money. I couldn't be loved by everybody.
Oh, sure.
That's fine.
If you're pushing boundaries. But I wanted to ask about this process of, we started with cultural processes in Russia, but it is also a kind of very sad process of social regress, right, in Russia, especially in recent 10, maybe 5 years. And a lot of comes to the freedom of expression, a repression of queer people in Russia, which I find very odd, this focus on specifically queer culture. But you devote a lot of time to queer culture in your art. Why do you think that, as I remember, and I've been living in Russia for some time, I remember people, I met people who moved to Russia in the 90s because Russia was the most liberal place for queer people in the whole region. It still kind of is, but you know, with the state repression, it's not anymore. Why do you think that?
We still have queer parties and so.
Yeah, but it's not going anywhere in terms of civil rights, for example.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I find it very mesmerizing example of Russia.
Like America in the 50s.
Exactly. But in 90s, it was like almost America in 90s. So what happened, and do you think that it's a larger picture of just a possibility of going into regress so quickly? Because it's shocking, actually.
It's not a question of regress. I mean, it's just because we're living in dictatorship, so everything which we could really speak about, like, it's not regress in our country, it's regress in the brain of one particular person, and his name is Vladimir Putin. It is his personal regress, and because of his power, he could spread this regress on all country. But actually, as I saw from my own experience, I was in jail for 2 years, so I saw that at least 70% of women around me, they weren't against lesbian relationships. And 30% of them were up for go to lesbian relationships, and 70% were completely okay with that. So I would say that Russian people are not so conservative as Putin wants them to portray.
Well, especially if you're in prison, you know, all those
It's
things
not
that...
just because of prison.
No, because all things surrounding you, social pressure is not there anymore, so you can be actually yourself at some point.
You have a lot of pressure in prison. You have a lot of social pressure in prison still. It's another type of pressure. I spoke with a lot of people from small cities, and actually we are quite, I would say that our women is quite liberated, and our girls are quite liberated.
Because of Soviet Union.
Even sexually liberated. But another problem which we have, we don't have any sexual education. So
yeah,
that's why it causes some problems.
That's horrible. I saw just one article just yesterday, 5 myths that Russia propagates about LGBT. One of them is that image of rainbow can turn your kid into gay kid. So it's horrible.
Cool.
it's horrible that in the era of internet, people keep believing that.
That was Nadezhda Tolokonnikova. You can download the full interview on YouTube, or you can watch it on our website. You can also, very importantly to our social media team, follow us on Twitter at Hromadske, at Hromadske with the hashtag Hromadske. You can follow all of our stuff and keep up with us throughout the week. We'll join you after a short break. It's been over 2 years since Russia's annexation of Crimea. During that time period, the indigenous Crimean Tatars have increasingly suffered, both because of their nonviolent resistance, civil disobedience, you might say, to the Russian occupiers, and also just for a lot of reasons. Also because they're an effective scapegoat for the Russian authorities. If they want to distract people, they can always use the scarecrow of Islamic terrorism, the straw man, I should say, of Islamic terrorism, and go after and arrest some Crimean Tatars. It's not great, and it has immense human consequences. We at Hromadske sent 2 reporters to the occupied peninsula around a month ago, and they made a video which we are about to show you, interviewing the family members of kidnapped, arrested Crimean Tatars, some of whom have been disappeared, and they also talked to some local civil society activists and lawyers who are somehow still operating in Crimea.
Это мой сын. Похищены были в один день, в одно время, одними и теми же людьми. И вот так вот мы больше о них ничего не знаем. Думать, что они там были какие-то деятели или там себе несли какую-то опасность, ну, нет смысла, потому что 18 лет моему сыну. Вот он был такой домашний и нормальный парень.
Ну, с ним так, а потом в тот же год его в сентябре похитили. Это где-то был, наверное, октябрь месяц. Была слежка за дочерью, младшей дочерью. Она мне рассказывала, она говорила, ты замечаешь, что за тобой ездит машина? Она мне говорила, что за мной, говорит, машина. Нет, она мне сказала уже после того, как уже зашли люди во двор сзади, и начали с ней заговаривать, предложили ей поехать с ними, к брату. Тогда она рассказала, что эта машина за ней, описала машину, все, ездит уже несколько дней, несколько недель даже, она сказала. То есть до школы, со школы.
Нам известно, что в самом деле в Крыму у нас сегодня, на сегодняшний день 12 людей под арестом. Обысков только в феврале у нас было в пределах 15 обысков. Ну, обыски вроде бы дело обыденное, да, прозаично звучит, но на самом деле это не обыски, а нападение на жилье. Это к утру это делается, там дети спят, там все, что, ну как обычно дома бывает. Ломает стекла, двери, вторгается в жилище, одевает наручники, там, не знаю, скручивает хозяев, мужчин, а дальше уже вот разговоры, и потом улыбки, и вроде бы все корректно.
Одна женщина, все мужчины, они смотрели там в маленькой комнате, где лежат книги. Что есть, какие книги. Потом женщина взяла через себя Коран, выкинула так вот. Посмотрели, выкинула. Потом нас сидели, нас допрашивали, спрашивали, где книги есть, какие книги мы читаем, где они хранятся. Спрашивали, кто мы, фамилия, имя, сколько нас детей в семье, кто родители. Ну так спрашивали.
Ко мне подошли люди из ЦП, сначала следователь, был только полковник, следователь Следственного комитета, он говорит, а вы никак не связываетесь со своей деятельностью пропажи вашего сына? Странно об этом говорить, навряд ли. А он говорит, да вот знаете, а мы связываем с этим. Поэтому от вашего поведения будет зависеть все дальнейшее.
Вам? 27 ему сейчас. Вот исполнилось уже вот после того, как его забрали, 11 числа его забрали, 20-го исполнилось 27 ему. Не 23. Он не стал там террористом или кем-то еще. Он стал мусульманином.
Просто мусульманином еще при Украине.
То есть это действительно не запрещено никак ни в России, ни в Украине. Быть мусульманином это не как-то плохо или как-то там чем-то опасно.
По каналу российскому показывают, как будто там нашли какую-то запрещенную литературу, все разбросанное. А люди, как будто уже дана информация, что у нас конкретно какое-то что-то запрещенное.
Какие-то
бумаги такое.
В феврале, 11-12 февраля прошло 12 обысков, сколько мы насчитали. Есть обыски, о которых люди просто боятся говорить, они тоже в эти дни проходили.
Так он никогда не был. Ну, ходил он в мечеть, все, как люди все по пятницам.
Они сказали конкретно, что он задержан по обвинению в участии этой организации, а на протяжении этих 2 месяцев будет разъясняться, правда это или нет.
Само подозрение, оно не обосновано. На чем оно строится? На каких-то опять аудиозаписях, где они обсуждают положение Крыма, ну, так скажем, под фактическим управлением России. Считаю, что это определенные репрессии и запугивание крымских мусульман. Все из 8, если каждого рассматривать, кто-то является правозащитником, кто-то активно, так скажем, вел активный образ жизни в своем регионе. Ну, большинство из них, как правозащитники, еще при Украине они тоже занимались защитой прав мусульман. Вот. Я считаю, что все-таки ФСБ именно по этому принципу их избрало, да? Вот. Попытка так более активных просто устранить и навесить вот этот ярлык терроризма, к сожалению.
So before we bid you farewell, I would like to urge you to watch this week's show on our website. You can watch it in full. You can download it as a podcast from Mixcloud, and you can also watch it in pieces by the individual interviews and segments on YouTube and on the website as well. And again, before we bid you farewell, we're going to show you a short promo clip of an investigation we've done called Traces of the Revolution. The film was made by Hromadski's Angelina Karyakina and Anastasia Stanko. It explores the fallout of Ukraine's so-called amnesty law on the participants of Euromaidan's deadly clashes. It's the second part in an award-winning acclaimed series, and we look forward to showing it to you. I'm Josh Kavensky, reporter at the Kyiv Post. Make sure to follow Hromadske for video coverage of everything in Ukraine and beyond, and the Kyiv Post for in-depth print coverage of Ukraine and the world around. Thank you for watching.
Громадяни, ваші дії носять антигромадський характер, грубо порушують закон, стоять на межі злочину.
У нас Харьковский Беркут был, у нас было 100 человек, да? Львовский Беркут 150 человек. Киевский Беркут, рота, это где-то человек 50-60. И еще был Кировоградский Беркут, это тоже до 100 человек. Мне самому интересно, в чем заключается превышение влады.